talking about the Republican tax breaks for big corporations. At that time, the Congressional Budget Office did assess that it would add $2 trillion to the deficit. Is that not true?
That is my recollection, that was the kind of number they came
That
up
was
with.
the CBO score.
Yes.
So it's interesting to hear so many of my colleagues who 3 years ago didn't give a damn about adding $2 trillion to the debt, now talking about the Build Back Better bill, which, as you said, doesn't add to the debt at the end of the 10 years. In fact, the Congressional Budget Office has already done its analysis. And one of the ways that it does not add to the debt is that we close some of those big tax breaks for multinational corporations who like to park their profits in tax havens. And we got rid of some of the incentives in that bill that actually encourage U.S. companies to ship jobs and equipment overseas. Isn't that the case?
That is the case.
And can you talk also about your efforts, your successful efforts to establish a sort of 15% global minimum rate in order to prevent the race to the bottom?
Yes. Over decades, what we have seen is that countries have been engaged in a race to try to attract more multinational firms to do business in their countries by cutting corporate tax rates. And if you look at the pattern across the globe, you see the corporate tax rates have simply been trending down. The consequence of that is that corporations have paid less and less tax in the United States and elsewhere. They have won from this competition, and countries like the United States and other countries are raising less and less money through taxation on corporations. In the United States, corporate taxes have fallen to around 1% of GDP as a consequence of this. And this international tax agreement that's been endorsed by, I think, 137 countries have agreed to hold hands and say, enough is enough. We need to raise taxes to support infrastructure spending, to support investment in people, to make our economies productive, to grow over time. And corporations that are profitable and successful need to pay their fair share. So we want to be able to tax companies at a reasonable rate and to stop this race to the bottom. And that's what the 15% global minimum tax achieves. From our point of view, the difference, we're the only country right now that has a global minimum tax. And our tax is 10.5%. It's half what companies based that operate only in the United States or multinationals pay on their U.S. income. And that big differential really encourages multinational companies based in the U.S. to shift their profits abroad. So by raising our own rate from 10.5 to 15, we narrow that differential. We help just purely domestic firms that right now are on an unfair, unlevel playing field versus multinationals that can shift their activities abroad. And the global agreement boosts competitiveness.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. I think it makes common sense, and it's important for U.S. businesses. There's also a provision in the bill that says folks who are making more than $10 million every year should pay a little bit more in U.S. taxes. I think that makes sense to most people around the country in order to help the whole country succeed. And you mentioned some of the items that we're going to then invest those funds in. It's fully paid for, including lowering child care costs, saying that no family should pay more than 8% on child care costs. That's one of the items, right?
Yes.
And there's also, as you mentioned, the provision with respect to the child tax credit. So this is one of the largest tax cuts for middle and lower income families ever, is it not? And we're talking about $3,600, up to $3,600 per year, per child, per family, which will expire on December 31st if we don't extend it as part of the Build Back Better legislation. Right. Isn't that the case?
That is true.
So we're talking about closing corporate tax loopholes, asking folks who are making more than $10 million a year to pay a little bit more so that we can lower costs and financial squeeze on American families, and it's all paid for. Isn't that right?
That is correct.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Senator Van Hollen. Senator Tillis is recognized.
Thank you,
North
Mr.
Carolina.
Chair. Secretary Yellen, Chair Powell, thank you for being here. Chair Powell, I'm glad to see you. You're